When you paint from a photo, do you ever feel like the results feel a little bit flat or maybe not as impactful as you expected them to be? Well, I'm Ashy, and in this video today, I'm continuing my series on color theory, and we're gonna talk about how to shift our colors from a reference photo. So the key is really to do the color shifting intentionally, because you don't necessarily just want to throw random colors out there to try to get some variety. You want to think about the mood and the emotional impact that you want your piece to have. So realism is awesome. And if you paint realism, that's awesome. And you should totally keep doing it if you enjoy it. But sometimes realism and emotional impact are not the same thing. Sometimes they can be, but a lot of times we want our art to be an interpretation of how we actually perceive something, not necessarily actually how it maybe looks exactly in real life. On top of that, if we go based off a reference photo versus doing like plein air painting, a reference photo can a lot of times flatten an image. So photographs are excellent tools. Cameras are awesome. There are different qualities of each one, but a lot of times photographs can miss things like subtleties in the shadows, and sometimes highlights can be overblown, and we can actually miss out on some of the richness of a scene because we're using a photograph instead of looking at it in real life. So here we're going to talk about how to make some of these shifts to make our paintings more impactful and come out how we want them to intentionally. So let's flow right into our discussion here. I'm going to use a photograph that I took, so I'll put that on the screen right here. So this photograph, I think it's a beautiful photograph. It's just a simple scene of some rocky, cliffy areas with the ocean, and it's beautiful. And we're gonna start by painting it very simply. We're gonna take it down to the bare bones, but we're gonna paint it using the colors from the photograph. So we're gonna jump in with that first. And what we're really thinking about with this is using the shapes and the composition to guide our painting. So I'm gonna take my pencil first and move this out of the way for a minute. And we're just gonna block off, because I don't want to do full page spreads for this. So we're just gonna block off, like, maybe I'll do 2 on this page and then 1 on the next. Okay, so I'm gonna do a frame here, and I'm just gonna kind of make it a square composition. And then we'll do another one here. And they're not gonna be exactly the same, but I'm just going to use these frames as reference, and I'm obviously not being very precise on these frames. Okay, so this is kind of a drill that you can do for yourself that will help you to then know and understand how to shift your colors in the future. I want to make this box a little bit bigger because I don't know why I made it so narrow. Anyway, and maybe I'll do a 4th one, but for now I plan to do just 3. But I might throw a 4th one in there, depending how long it takes. Okay, so our first one is gonna be painted using the original colors as close as we can. Our second one is going to be a cool version. Our third one is going to be like a warmer and high contrast version, and then maybe I will do a 4th, and this one will kind of be the wild card out here, and we're gonna go modern, okay, like pop art, which for a landscape might be kind of funny. So we'll see how it turns out. And this is the fun part, that it doesn't really matter how it turns out. This is just an exercise in our sketchbook, so who cares how it turns out, right? And we're gonna shoot for doing maybe 10 minutes on each of these, maybe, okay? So I'm not trying to go crazy with details here. It's just to get the mood, okay? So let me glance back at my reference photo again. And I'm just gonna sketch in each of these generally the same shape. So we're gonna have kind of a horizon line here. There's kind of a hill coming down and it comes out into the ocean. And then we have kind of a path, not path, but a coastline here that comes back in, and then it'll jut back out, okay, and come back out that way. Okay, so I'm really using the composition here that matches the photo. Okay, and then here's the rest of our horizon line. Oops, getting messy here, it's fine. Here's the rest of our horizon line, okay? And we're just gonna keep it that simple, okay? So horizon line, try to put it generally the same spot. And I'm just doing this sketch super quickly, trying to keep it as similar as possible. There's gonna be variations. I'm not tracing. Okay. Okay, there's our second one, our third one. And here we're just looking at how to change the colors and the mood with the colors. There are whole other things on how to change and alter the composition to create drama and change the emotion of the scene too, but we're not getting into all that on this series. This is just about color, okay? So once I get all these sketches in, we'll start waking up our paints. I need to find my spray bottle. Okay, so generally, same sketch for each one, right? And let me go get my spray bottle and I'll be right back. Now, to know you have kids, the spray bottle that I used for my art was in the bathroom because they were drinking out of it. It's just sink water, it's fine. But sometimes you gotta go search for things. Okay, so I'm just gonna wake up my paints here and I'm just gonna spray them down liberally. And I'm waking up all this extra leftover paint that's in my palette too. Okay, those are really wet. So now I'm gonna take my sketchbook and I'm gonna move this over here so that I can center this part of it. And then I'm just gonna use some round brushes here. This one's a size 14. This is Degato artist brushes. They are not expensive, but they're nice. They don't shed a lot. They hold a decent amount of water and they've held up really well. This one is a size 2 Degato. So that's gonna be for smaller details. Maybe we'll see if I even get there. I do have a whole jar of brushes here that I can grab from as needed. But I'm just gonna start with these and see what happens. So our reference photo, we're gonna start by putting in our lightest values. Now this is not a tutorial on how to paint in watercolor. This is about the colors. So I'm gonna speed some of these up. It's not gonna be very detailed on the explanation of what I'm doing here. I do have tutorials for how to paint. Actually, I did this painting. So I'll put a link to that in the description. So I actually did this painting as a full 16 by 20 painting and I have a tutorial for it. So I'm not gonna go over all that. So I'm just gonna start by putting in some light colors and I'm loosely going in my box, not really. Okay, get it nice and wet. Okay, and so I'm starting with the colors from the reference photo, okay? So we have some yellows, they're all mixed up. Yellows for the horizon line, and then I'm putting some cobalt blue in for the sky. And then we'll add some grays, leave some white space for some clouds. And it's going to be nice and simple. It's not going to be a lot going on here. Okay, so here's a gray cloud, shadow. Okay, very simple. Now we're going to add some of our blues for the ocean. So it's going to be that cobalt to reflect the sky. Dog's making noise. Trying to get her to stop. Okay, and then we'll lift out some areas right along the shoreline for some waves. Okay, get some darker, thicker paint in. And again, this is a study. This is not going to be a completed painting, okay? So don't look for it to be like some sort of masterpiece. That's not the point. Okay, now the rocks are pretty gray. They might have a little bit of greenish in them. So we're going to use some, let me kind of clean up a little bit here. Move some of that. I'm going to use some cobalt, some burnt sienna, to make a gray, and then just add a little bit of my yellow to make it a little bit more green. Okay, and then we're just gonna drop that in. And it's all wet and wet, so it's gonna bleed, and I'm not that worried about it. I can clean up that bleed there. Now I'm going to get a darker mix. For my shadows. So much thicker, less water. Okay, and I'm going to start placing in some of those shadows. And in the reference photo, a lot of this shadow, it just looks dark, like black. I'm not using black here. I don't really ever use black for shadows, so I'm just mixing up my blue and my burnt sienna, my cobalt and burnt sienna to get a dark color here. To be kind of gray. Now again, this is not detailed, okay? So it's all bleeding together, and that's okay. It's just an illustration. It's just a point that I'm making about color. I'm going to add a little bit of greens in. Add a little more yellow to it. It is a little bit warmer. It's all very muted. Okay. Some greens up here. There are some grasses. And then we have a little bit of some yellows popping in, where some light's reflecting off some of these stones. Okay. So, again, quick study. It's not neat, it's not finished, but it gets us an idea of the mood of the painting. So now we're going to take it and cool it down. We're going to make it much more blue heavy, okay? So I'm still going to use some cobalt here, but I'm going to add in some ultramarine as well to get some more darks. And if I mix in a little bit of my burnt sienna with it, see how much darker and moodier this is than this, okay? So that's what I'm going to use for the sky. And I'm still going to kind of go with the same general idea with the sky going from darker to lighter. Okay, and just mixing all those blues. Okay, and then maybe we'll tap in some water here. to get some bleeds. Okay, let me get a little bit more blue in there. Oops, that was a lot more blue. That's fine. Just kind of blend it out. Let it bleed down. Okay. And then let's put in some really dark, thicker paint to maybe look like some of those darker clouds. Okay, so now we have some really dark clouds instead of our white fluffy clouds, right? But generally the same sky, just flipped to be dark and moody. Okay, now we're going to take those same colors and reflect them in our ocean. Okay, now we'll add some water. We still want some crashing waves, so that's still going to be lighter around some of these areas. So just lifting, and then we'll come in and add some more of the dark. Okay, and then same with our land. It's going to be much more cool and dark, so same mixture here. And so this is really a very limited palette here. Mostly I'm using burnt sienna and ultramarine. Okay, so I'll put that in. And I'm still trying to build up the shadows in the same area as they are in the picture. Okay. Okay, so there's a cooler version, right? So same composition, but completely different idea and mood. This one feels much more mysterious and stormy and moody, and this one feels very bright and kind of springy, right? So now we're going to go with warmer and higher contrast. So now instead of shifting toward these cool colors, we're gonna shift more toward our warm colors, okay? So my sky is gonna be much more intense. Okay, so I'm gonna get that much more intense color started and do kind of the underpainting in yellow ochre, okay? And that's gonna warm up the whole painting just immediately, okay? So this one I'm kind of approaching the same way as I did the first one with getting it wet first. And it doesn't really matter what approach you use in terms of painting techniques. It's going to be our color choices that matter here, okay? So we're gonna use some really intense colors here. And we don't want our sky to turn green, but I do want to get some blue into the sky. So I'm gonna add that in and let it kind of do its thing on the page without a lot of brush strokes so that it doesn't blend and turn green. Now our ocean is going to have an almost purpley hue to it because of that warmth. Okay, so we're gonna mix in our blue and we can drop in some reflections of the sky to go with that. I don't know why I did this on my pop art. Okay, I'll just change the labels. I don't know what I'm doing. That's okay though. I'll just change the labels. It is fine. This is not the pop art, though it's kind of wild. It's not quite wild enough to be the pop art. This is my warm and high contrast. So we're just warming up the blue, adding the red to it. So alizarin crimson, it's kind of a pinkish red. Again, look at where the highlights are, lifting some of those out. And now our land is going to be also much more orangey. Okay. And then because it's warmer, my shadows, instead of being blues and grays are going to be more browns. Okay, so I'm going to use burnt sienna and a little bit of cobalt to get my shadows in. Okay, so something like that, right? So that's a completely different vibe than these other two. Again, that's not this. Ooh, that's wet. Anyway, messy, ignore that. This is warm. This one's gonna be pop art. Okay, so for pop art, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take all of the highlights and make them warm colors. So yellows, oranges, reds. And we're gonna take all of our shadows and make them cool colors. So we're kind of blending and it's gonna look wild and crazy, and that's okay. It's going to be crazy, and I'm probably not gonna like it because, to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this style, but that's okay. We're gonna do it anyway. Okay, so here's our sky, which is a light value, so it's gonna be warm. Okay, we're gonna do a yellow sky, and then I'm gonna add some oranges in to the darker areas. That's intense orange. It's fine, it's supposed to be intense, right? Okay, there's our sky. And then we're gonna have some highlights here, right along the edge. And then we're gonna have highlights in the water. And then I'm going to choose my highlight spots. So here I'm painting it opposite. I'm painting my highlights first instead of going in with the darks. Push some of them a little bit more orange. Now, let's choose some cool colors now for our lowlights. So I'm gonna use some purples, I think, but a more bluey purple. So it's not gonna be the pinky purple. This one is Windsor Violet, is my bluey purple. So we're gonna get that in, and that's gonna be a high contrast with the yellow. So I wanna make sure they don't mix, because then they'll turn brown. Ooh, that's dark. Okay, and then we'll put in some ultramarine in some of those areas as well for an even more intense dark. So our coolest color is going to be our darkest, so that's going to be our blues. Blues are always the coolest. Now for our land, I'm going to neutralize it a little bit. So we're still going to go cool, but it's going to be not quite as crazy of cool as that pure ultramarine. Okay, so here's our shadows along the edge of that cliff, and then we have some shadows in here. Then we have our shadows right along the edge here, of working their way in. We got the shadows on top of our little stepping stones here, and then we'll add a little bit of purple here as well. Just kind of blend up some of these shadows into that hill to make it stand out a little bit more. And then I'm gonna lift along the back edge of the water, pull out some of that vibrancy and kind of blend it in together. And then I do think I need to add just a little bit of definition along the edge to kind of delineate that edge of the land a little bit more. Same thing here, just a little bit more depth to create that separation. Okay, so there is our same composition in 4 different colorways, right? So we have our kind of original based on the reference photo. And again, these are just studies. They're super quick. These are not finished paintings, so they're not going to look amazing. They're not going to look like masterpieces, but we can still feel the different vibes, right? So here's our original, and it's fine. If that's the mood you're going for, sometimes the original colors can work well. Here we have our cool ones, which has a much more emotional, moody feel to it, right? So if you're going for that vibe, shift your colors cooler. Here we have our pop art, which is just wild to me. I'm not a huge fan of pop art, but I can see the appeal of this, and it's very vibrant and energetic, right? And then you have our warm colors, which this is going to give you almost like a nostalgic feel, sort of that warm, glowy, end of day, golden hour feel. So you can have a whole bunch of different moods, even with the same composition. So I showed you this example, but some other easy ways to shift colors. You can choose to, like I did, shift the whole palette from the original cooler or warmer. So that's one easy way. You can definitely boost the saturation and intensity of the original colors. I didn't do a version like that. So I could have gone with the original colors, but made them much more intense and saturated. And that's going to give it a little bit more of an energetic and hyper-realistic feel almost. You can definitely use your complementary colors, like we've discussed in other videos in this series, to mute your tones and create more interesting shadows that way. So I did that a lot in my examples here. I don't use black or gray. I create my own by mixing complementary colors. So play with your different colors and your complements and determine what mixtures you like best to create interesting shadows. And that's gonna give you a much more unique and dynamic feel to your artwork. Limiting your palette is another great way to shift your colors from the reference photo. So instead of trying to color match from the tube, you can always mix your colors, and you're going to get different effects depending on which colors you mix, because each pigment has different properties, which we'll get into in the next video. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel, make sure you subscribe, because you don't want to miss that video to wrap up our color theory series, and all of my other information on the channel, tons of tutorials and different things. So make sure you subscribe to check it out. But you're going to want to play with your pigments to figure out which mix together to create the shadows that you like, and which combos you like to use for your limited palettes. So just choosing 2 or 3 colors is very powerful and can create a very emotional and exciting painting if you do it correctly. Another way to shift from the reference photo is to neutralize distractions. So if there's elements in the photo that you don't want to draw attention to, you don't have to delete them or remove them from the composition, but you could tone down the colors so that you are not adding focus to it with the colors. On the flip side, if there's an area of the painting that you're like, I really want to emphasize that, sometimes putting a bold, saturated version of a color there will draw the eye there. So you can use color to affect the composition without actually even changing the composition, which is fun. So you can add just a really bold spot of color somewhere, and that's going to draw the eye there and make that more of your focal point. So you can use your colors that way, and you don't have to go based on the reference photo. So when you're looking at your reference photos, before you ever dip your brush in water and start to activate your paints, I recommend that you look at the photo and you ask yourself a few questions. So ask, what mood do I want this painting to evoke once it's completed? And then once you determine the mood, you can look at the paint or look at the photograph critically and actually ask, what colors in this photograph are contributing to that mood? And which ones should I try to recreate? Which ones are drawing away from that mood and should I just eliminate completely and not use? Or which ones are distracting from that mood, where I can shift them either by neutralizing them or pull them toward one tone or another, rather than eliminating, to help to support the mood of the painting rather than detract from it. And it's really those decisions that takes you from kind of copying a reference photo to creating your own art based on a reference image. And that's really what's going to push you to the next level in your art if you've been feeling like you're not always happy with how you are painting based on a reference photo. So again, I definitely recommend doing this exercise that I did here, where you paint from a single reference photo and do it in multiple different colorways and just select it. I mean, it can be at random almost, and it's going to teach you a lot. And they don't have to be completed paintings. Do this in your sketchbook. Do this as practice. Don't put pressure on yourself for the painting to be finished, because then you're going to distract yourself from actually focusing on the color. So again, these versions are not finished. If I wanted completed paintings, I would be spending a lot more time and making sure that I'm not getting crazy blooms where I don't want them. And, you know, obviously I did this all in one layer. These don't have any details built up. So these are not finished, but I could definitely take one of these and turn it into a finished painting. And that's the point of our sketchbook and doing color studies, is that they're not finished. And don't put pressure on yourself to be finished, but just observe what you're creating and pick out things that you like about it and focus on, this is a study for color. What am I getting out of these colors? And again, don't put pressure on yourself for them to look beautiful, because they're not going to, and that's okay. And really, the more that you play with studies like this, the more you're going to train your intuition. So you won't necessarily have to start with a full color study for every painting that you ever do, because after you do this a couple times, you're going to be like, yes, I know exactly which combo of colors I want to create the feeling that I want in this painting. And you're going to be able to make those decisions more intuitively. So just remember that you are not a printer. If you wanted an exact replica of a photograph, you can always print it out. And that's my view on photorealism. It's not my style. I think it's amazing that people can do that. But in my opinion, like if I wanted a painting or a photograph on the wall, I would just put a photograph on the wall. So I want to expand the photograph and create a more emotional depth to my paintings. And by playing with color, we really get to do that as artists. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope this was helpful for you. I really hope that you dive in and do some of these color studies, because they're really fun and they're a nice way to relax in addition to learn. And make sure that you, again, stay tuned for my next video in this series, and also check out my last videos. This is a whole series and you're hopping in at number 5, I think. So there's 4 other awesome videos about color that I highly recommend you check out. And again, I will put the tutorial video for painting this scene in a completed version of the painting in the description below. So just click see more in the description and you'll see tons of information about materials that I use, but I'll put a link to the tutorial for this reference video, or for this reference photo also. And I would love for you to put a comment below the video about your favorite way to shift color temperature, or if you're just getting started and you're excited about trying this, what vibe are you most excited about trying to create? And just start a conversation there in the comments. I think it'd be very interesting to see the different perspectives on shifting color from reference photos. So let's start that conversation. Thank you again so much for watching, and until next time, keep those paints flowing.